There are tons of buffs in Kingshot and dozens of events, but how do you know which one work on which event? Well, this is exactly what this guide is showing us, and I'm going to go over every single aspect of it so that you know exactly what you should be using and not wasting some of these buffs. So the first thing to know is that buffs, if you need to activate them, you can go into your backpack, go into bonuses, and there are a lot of the buffs here. However, clicking up here just under your screen goes into the city bonus, and this is where you're going to be able to apply buffs. So training capacity here, gathering speed, these buffs work all the time for the open world. This is going to let you train more soldiers at once, so this is good to pre-prepare for kvk or strongest runner, for example. And gathering speed is good to activate basically all the time. You have to do this once every 24 hours, and it just makes you gather faster. It's really good, and it's very cheap. You also get teleports and random teleporters, which are free for 10 times, so that's pretty nice, but those are not buffs. Counter recon, this is a buff that lets you not get scouted. So this is for PvP, KvK, but it's specifically Swordland. This is where it's really good. Now, everything else, these are the real buff that I'm talking about. So this is all different buffs. Some of them you'll get for spending and stuff, but they cost, you know, between 2 to, I think, 10,000 gems. That they're pretty expensive. If you go into the store here, VIP, you can see, like, you know, some of these buffs are here, so you can spend, you know, this 50% off, but they're still 10,000. Otherwise, at the gem store, you'll find some of the quick march buff as well. And otherwise, when you go in here and you basically go and click, you will, you know, get asked you want to spend it, and you buy and use it, and that's it. So you'll see that there is a lot of buffs, and I will explain exactly what they all do. I mean, some of them are very explanatory. Squad lethality, you know, your squad lethality is increased by 10% or 20% depending. So very, very good. Same with attack. Attack boost is really good. Squad defense. So like, for example, in Bear, defense doesn't do anything. Health doesn't really do anything. So this is why you'd activate the lethality in the attack. But for PvP, you'd activate everything. For KvK, especially for Swordland, you activate everything. If you're a rally leader, you want to activate everything all the time when you're rallying. If you're just a joiner, you don't need to activate anything except sometimes the deployment capacity, which lets you send more troops. So if you send a troop out and it's 100,000, well, you activate this, well, you're going to be able to send 120,000, which means more of your troops are participating. You're getting more points, as well as less of your members need to join, which means people can join more rallies. So these are all the things that come here. Enemy attack, very good. This is going to be lowering their attack. So this is, again, a defensive buff against enemies. But also, if you attack someone, they're counter-attack you kind of thing, you lower that. Health and defense, good. Enemy defense, lower the enemy's defense, so you do more damage to them. Again, for Bear, this is why I activated only a few of these buffs for Bear, because these are useless for Bear. But for PvP, I'd activate basically everything. Now, also pets. If you click here, you will gain more and more pets as the game progresses, but generally, you'll see the two that I have activated right now. They have a little icon on the top left that's like a sword. This is PvP buff. So this one reduces enemies' health by 3.5%. And you can get this up higher to 5% by leveling up your giant moose in the pet enclosure. Same with this one. The bear, grizzly bear, whatever, increases your march speed and reduce enemy lethality, which you can also increase. So activating these buffs, they have, you know, a cooldown of 20 hours, but they last for 2 hours. So it lasts for any event in this game. Very good there. Lastly, King Castle. You go to King Castle here, you look at King's Perk, you have appointments. These are 6 positions. This one gives you speed for construction, research, and training. Very good for a lot of events, but not for PvP. This one is for resource production. Again, healing speed can be useful for PvP for sure. And this one is, again, lethality. So appointment-based squad lethality. So this one, very good. Lethality is very, very good. Now, this one is also very good for PvP. 5% attack and 2,500 more deployment capacity. So again, very, very good buffs. And Noble Advisor is for training, so this is good for certain things, but not for VP. But also the king themselves has like their own buff that they can apply it to themselves. So this one has healing speed and infirmary, but you can apply yourself other buffs that are going to be 5% attack and defense and stuff. So like the king has their own buff, but only the person who's in the king position gets that buff. Now that's a special buff that applies way more than every other buff in here, but that is why I'm going to go over them here. You'll see this explains the different types of buffs that I just talked about and where they work. So city war buff, we just talked about those. Those are pretty much activated by gems. March speed. So this is the not really a buff, but this is the one where you can accelerate your troops. So in Swordland or Eternity's Reach, these are very important. So this is making your march go 50% faster or 25% faster, or recalling it after you notice that you don't want to go anymore because you're going to die. And you can click on these multiple times to accelerate. So at 2 minutes, you activate 50%. It's now 1 minute, 50% again, it's 30 seconds. 50% again, it's 15 seconds. So whales will sometimes press on it like 10 times and spend like 20,000 gems and get their march from like 5 minutes to 30 seconds or to 2 seconds and appear in your city instantly. So this is important to know also when it works. Deployment, that's the one for more troops capacity. Pet skills, we just talked about. Island buff, this is passive. This is not something you have to ever do anything about, but you get a lot of buffs from your island, which are very basic percentage-based buff that you get from all the different things that you place on your island. So 2% attack, 2% HP. So this is what they mean. Territory bonus, this is going to be if you're defending on your territory. So when you are in your own kingdom, on your territory, under your flag, like my city is right now, if you attack me here, I get a buff. I think it's like a 10% attack or something like that. This works also for your planes, HQ and stuff like that, which in general, most of the time that doesn't really happen because when you fight in this game, it's usually KVK, and KVK is around the castle, which is neutral territory while the fight is happening. So if you have civil war on your server, like this would be useful, or the first month of your server maybe, but in general, and you see it's basically applicable almost never in almost any event. But it's something that does exist, so it's good to know about. Outpost bonuses are, again, also something based territory that your alliance captures and stuff, and you get these buffs. Again, it's static. You just get these buffs because your alliance has these buffs, and that's it. And again, you can see it applies pretty much every time except Arena. King's buff, that's what I just talked about. So the king will be able to appoint these special buff for the whole server to have at once. Usually it's like training, research speed, and stuff like that. But there's quite a few of them that could be like healing, for example, which could matter in some events. So this is when they apply. And then the ministry buff are the ones you apply for that you hold for 30 minutes and you have like a 24 hours cooldown before you can apply. So this is the one I just showed you as well, where you have to go and physically apply in the castle. So bear trap, you can see that some debuffs has no impact. So I mean, first of all, Aura Celeste made this screen. I just basically remodeled it so that it's nicer quality, but they are the ones who made the original. So thank you for making that, whoever you are. Now this one for bear trap, as I said, some debuff has no impact because it's an offensive. The bear doesn't attack you back, so defensive stuff has no point, but offensive stuff matters a lot. And you can see that for bear trap, almost everything works. You can do march speed. You shouldn't really, there's no point, but you could. Pet skill, very important. City war buff, very important. Deployment can be important. Island buff happens, so that's good. Territory bonus doesn't happen, even though you are technically on territory, but they don't work. And then everything else works. So for your big whales, you want them to apply for the ministry buff that gives them lethality and attack. This is going to make a difference for the total score of people joining them as well as themselves. So bear, almost everything works. Viking vengeance, same thing, but in this case even the territory bonus works because it is on your territory and you are getting attacked in your city. So every single buff in the game works for Viking vengeance. Now I don't find Viking really hard at the beginning. I don't really ever activate any buffs. You don't really need to. You can use the pet skill because they're free. I wouldn't spend gems though, to be honest, but after many months of playing, it's going to get harder, and there are going to be a time where having the buffs will make a difference. So this is something to keep in mind. Alliance Championship, now that is, I think, one of the most important one to have buffs for. So for Alliance Championship, when you come here and you deploy your troops, you will see basically you get here and you send your troops in and you have a certain amount of power associated with them. Now if you have buffs on these troops, you will keep the buffs. So there's a certain ratio and stuff like that, but also having all the buffs, even if you leave the event and you go back to your city and whatever, these are still going to work. So even if your buffs disappear, your troops stay with the buff. So it's important that when you have all the buffs activated and you join Alliance Championship, you put your stuff in there and then you leave it with all the buffs. And then when the event starts, they're going to have retained these buffs for the entirety of the event. So I have a full video on this event. You should check out on my channel to get more points and more rewards that explains it more in depth. But this is really where it's important. If you are going to use all your buffs for KVK and Alliance Championship is going on, or for Bear, well, send your troops in there, lock them in, and then while they have all the buffs, you're basically getting, you know, double value for the same buffs that you use for another event. Now, what works in there? Well, all of the city and war buffs, so every single one of them works. And then march speed, no. Deployment, yes. So it's important, especially the big deployment, because 20% more troops makes a huge difference. Pet skills work as well. Iron buffs always work. Territory bonus is not your territory. Outboard, like all the stuff here doesn't matter, except for ministry buff, I think is the one that really matters here. So King's buff do work, so whatever buffs I activated is fine, but that's harder to time. But I think the high king buff does work here. So if you're the king of your server, you're going to be stronger. Now the ministry buff, this is where you could apply for lethality or for the attack bonus, and then when your troops are locked in the championship, they will retain that buff. So Of course, not everyone can do it on a whole server, but you do not have a cooldown on when you use these ones. So one member of your alliance could apply for the buff while bear is happening, have all these buffs on, register, and then another member can also apply for them. Since the buff lasts for 2 hours, you know, it can be done. It's really min-maxing, but it is something that does make a difference, so it's good to know. Now, Swordland, again, I think that's probably also one of the most important one in the game. In this case, you also want every buff you can, except if you're like a free-to-play, where you're going to be joining people's rally and garrison, but never really attacking. In this case, it doesn't really matter what kind of buffs you are, but you are going to want to have the deployment one to send more troops at once, I think. And then the march speed ones, you do get some free ones during Swordland, but you are going to, you know, sometimes use them to get to a rally in time because they are short and you sometimes are far, but you want to join it. So this is, I think, the one that's most important for low spenders. But if you're attacking, rallying, or defending, garrisoning anything in Swordland, you need every single buff activated. All the pet, all the war buff, all the deployment buff. And you are not going to get King's buff, except the High King gets their own buff. But Ministry, you are going to be able to get the buffs for lethality and attack. So you can sign up for the buff so that it times with your Swordland. It's very good. But again, that's going to be maybe 2 people in your entire Swordland because the buffs go per server. And debuff, like the king can apply debuff to people who misbehave. Well, in this case, the debuffs don't work. So, I mean, it doesn't matter if you have debuff or not. It doesn't make any difference. Sanctuary battle, this is in the open world of your server. And these happen pretty regularly. And again, it's similar as everything else. You can see pretty much every buff works except the territory because it's not your territory. So, it's not, I won't say too much worth it to spend because usually it's only like 1 or 2 rally. Everybody else is just joining the rally. So for the rally leaders, the buffs are important. Everybody else, not as much. Now, Eternity's Reach is a special one. Of course, there is going to be some PvP in Eternity's Reach, especially when the middle opens at 7 minutes left. However, generally, if you're not a whale, you're not going to get the middle much. So every single buff works here. And personally, I do like having the deployment buff there. And I will activate some of the pet skills and stuff. But if you're not going to be competing for the middle and you're just going to be gathering, which by the way, you can get top 5 every time just by gathering, so you don't really need to go for the middle. So you don't really need to apply any of the buffs. It's good to know that the king's buffs and the ministry buff don't work, but really, like, I really don't think you should be spending too much buffs on Eternity's Reach unless you're well going for the middle. Now, castle battle, well, that's the big one. That's for KVK as well as for your server, and it happens regularly. Now, everything works except the territory buff, and because castle battle means there's no king buff applied, so they don't work because nobody can have them because the castle is not conquered when the battle is happening, so there's no buff to be had there. However, again, it's a thing of mostly going to be rallies. There's going to be a lot more rallies because there's 4 towers and a castle, so you could be joining, you know, different people's rallies, and there's going to be much more rally leaders involved. So this is going to mean that everybody who's rallying or garrisoning should have every buff activated. Everybody else, not as much. Again, you can only deploy 1 troop per castle battle. So that means that 1 troop at a time, which means that the deployment buff is very important here because that means you can send 20% more troops. So you have much more of an impact. So in my opinion, for most people, this is the deployment one is what you're going to be using in castle battle. Everything else is mostly for going to be the whales who are rally leaders and defend. Now, Tree Alliance Clash, this happens, I think, like once a month. It's a pretty rare event. It's a very nice event and it gives a ton of reward. However, buffs are a bit different here. So you do get all the city and war buffs, and in this one, there is a lot of 1v1 fighting. This is a very different event than everything else. You put troops in little bases and then you do duels 1v1 against enemy troops. This is, I think, where every single player who should be using the buffs. It makes the biggest difference. Like, outside of being rally leaders and garrison, in this game mode there isn't a rally leader or garrison. This is the only game mode where you are going to be 1v1ing all the time, every player. So I think the city and war buff are the most important one. You can use the march speed, which is also very good during the event. Deployment is no difference. You pre-deploy your troop at a certain ratio, so you don't get to do deployment skills, so don't waste it on there. Pet skills you should be activating for sure. And king buff and ministry buff, those should be for your strongest players still for during the event, because the strongest players are still going to have the biggest impact, but they do work. So this is something to keep in mind for the big whales who are in this event. You kind of do want to apply for these buffs for the event if you can. Arena is pretty straightforward. Nothing works. Arena is a different game mode entirely. It's like Conquest. Most of you will know what it is by now. There is not a single buff that works there, so don't waste your time. The only thing that matters in Arena is your hero power. So the skills your heroes have, level 4, level 5, and their level and the gear. So all the gear they wear. And the only other thing is going to be the master. So the new masters that boost the arena. So that's it. Now the last one, Merchant Empire. That's like the caravan event. And it's very good for getting rewards and stuff. In this one, you're going to send caravans with heroes and troops. And then you're going to raid other people's caravans and troops. So you can see that most buffs work for this. I don't really know what the march speed would matter because the event kind of does it for you. However, having a higher deployment, pet skills, city war buffs, they all gonna make a difference to winning. I wouldn't really not spend any buffs on Merchant Empire because when you do the event, you can always refresh what you're gonna attack, and it will let you choose weaker players than you to get the rewards. You don't really need to go for, you know, buffs. But your caravan might get raided, but no matter how many buffs you have, the whales will raid you and you won't be able to do anything about it. So I never use buffs, but this is the buffs that work and don't work for this event if it's useful to you. So that's about it for this list. Now, there might be other events that come in the future that didn't exist when this list was made, and there might be new events added in the game. So if those come, it will be interesting to see, but it gives a good idea that generally most of the buffs here kind of work for you. And if you go in your game here and you click, this also will show you kind of like, you know, the amount of power and buffs that you're currently having. So when you apply some buffs and stuff, you'll see them, as well as like when you look at a battle report, for example, this is for my Kingsland. You'll go down here and the buffs here, you know, this will show you your bonuses and kind of like where you're getting some of these bonuses. And some of the bonuses are obviously going to be more complicated to understand, but you can really look deep into what buffs work and stuff for all the events. But in general, I find that this is very helpful to know when to use buffs, and especially like the deployment capacity, I think is one of those that has a very big impact in a lot of events. Like I said, especially KVK, when you are limited to how many troops you can send, having more troops in one rally means that you're going to get more points. And also when you're doing solo attacks, well, having more troops means your attack is stronger. So hopefully this guide was helpful to you. And let me know if you have any other tips or buffs that I haven't mentioned or that could apply that were not mentioned on this list. Share that in the comments below for everybody to see. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.